of year again where we're taking meetings outdoors.
This is my quasi inside outside. It's actually full enclosed. But it looks like I'm outside, which is, and it has much better light than the inside.
You get sunshine at least. Yeah.
Yeah. It's awesome.
I have my window wide open, but there are so many birds chirping. It's actually a little loud. So I have to get back out there after this.
The right kind of problem.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll probably just wait another minute or two in case anyone's kind of running a minute or two behind, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, well, I think we're good. If anyone else comes in, you know, they'll just join into the great conversation. So hi, everyone. Thank you so very much for coming to our open hours today. Net Impact team is very excited to have you. I am just gonna quick share my screen a second. Apologize. There we go. All right. Oh goodness, I am so sorry, everyone. I am not the best at this, apparently. All right. So we are so excited today to do our open hours with you guys, and we're gonna hear from Shedd Aquarium's Andrea Denshon and Jacqueline Wagner. Just quick before we get started, the Net Impact team and I wanted to just welcome you guys and share with you, if you haven't heard, about who we are and what we do on campus. So we are DePaul's only professional sustainability networking group, and our mission is to provide students with a platform to engage and become a part of a network of leaders in the social and environmental impact for sustainable development. And what you can get when you're a member with us is we do one-on-one networking events with leaders in sustainability. We have open hours like you're gonna be a part of here today. And we do panel sessions, and then we build connections with Chicago leaders in social and environmental impact. And if you haven't checked us out on Instagram, our Instagram name is there along with our LinkedIn. If you scan the QR code, it will bring you right to our D-Hub page. And if you click that link below, it will bring you right up to the sign up page. And just a quick mention again before we get started is our upcoming events. We have a Seating Change film screening on April 20th, and we have open hours with Professor Maya Ranko on May 11th. So our wonderful speakers that are joining us today is Andrea Denshon. She is the Senior Director of Government Affairs and Conservation Policy at Shedd Aquarium. She is a leader and government affairs professional with over 2 decades of experience providing strategic guidance for public, private, and nonprofit entities. She's passionate content expert and advisor, develops creative and sustainable solutions in response to industry and market demands. She's passionate about how government affairs and policy can be used as a spark for innovation while advancing critical public policy. And we also have Jacqueline Wagner. She is the Director of Conservation Action at Shedd Aquarium. She's a conservation and sustainability expert with deep personal commitment to improving the health and well-being of all people, wildlife, and the planet. Her work is rooted in authentic partnerships, creative and innovation solutions, and a hopeful vision for a sustainable future. So thank you both for joining us today, and I will let you guys take it from here.
Awesome, thank you. And Andrea, do you want to start, introduce, or do you want me to kick things off?
No, go ahead, kick things off and I'll jump right in. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Andrea. Yeah, I'll go ahead and start. I am a DePaul alum, so I'm honored to be invited to share with you all a little bit about my background and to invite Andrea, my colleague who I work really closely with. So as Director of Conservation Action at Shedd, I actually just kind of want to start off with just what this may look like at Shedd. And a lot of folks know the aquarium as a site to visit with their friends and family. Hopefully a lot of you have been to the aquarium already. But a lot of folks are less familiar with our conservation and sustainability work. Some of that happens within the walls of the aquarium, and a lot of it happens outside of the walls of the aquarium. So for many years, Shedd has worked on reducing our own environmental footprint. We have worked to become more energy efficient. We work on water conservation. We're reducing our plastic footprint and our waste footprint overall, and have a target of becoming zero waste. And we are just taking, many steps to becoming a more sustainable organization as an actual site. Andrea and I don't really work in the facilities department. I really work on all of that, but we really are grateful to have colleagues who are committed to reducing our environmental footprint within the aquarium. What Andrea and I do, and what other folks that we work with do, is more so outside of the aquarium walls. And so we do outreach, education, partnerships with different types of industries, whether it's the restaurant industry, which I work closely with on plastic reduction, or working with corporate groups to bring them out to volunteer on habitat restoration projects. A lot of things that happen outside of our walls. So my focus is conservation action, getting people to do conservation and sustainability work with Shedd to further our conservation objectives. And so sometimes, like, some of the examples that I shared, it could be education, volunteer opportunities, partnerships with different community groups or businesses, but really kind of activating folks to make a difference. So I'll hand it over to Andrea if you want to introduce yourself. I think that might be a good transition to kind of the overview of conservation and sustainability at Shedd and what I do, and then you can introduce what you do.
Thanks so much, and so glad to have you all. Have an amazing alum doing amazing work each day. You should be very proud of this DePaul alum's amazing work. I am a political scientist by training. I'll give you a little bit of background on who I am and how I got to here. What I do day in and day out is the shorthand. If I'm at a cocktail parties, they say I'm a policy wonk. But really in this space, I am deeply committed to this work to try to achieve the goals that we have, which is making a sustainable, more just, and more healthy and vibrant world for humans and for wildlife, and for the places that both humans and wildlife call home. Like I said, I'm a political scientist by training, both in undergrad and in grad school. I went to a university just south of you all, at the University of Chicago for grad school. And one of the things that I think is important when you think about the transition from academic work to applied in the field kind of work is how important it is to be able to work cross-discipline with each other. While I'm trained in political science and have been working for almost 25 years, amazingly, doing government affairs and public policy work, I work every day with folks like Jacqueline. Jacqueline and I work very, very closely, as we shared before. Also work with folks in corporations and NGOs, not only in Chicago, but across the state and across the country, including faith-based leaders. And so, a little bit of secret into my grad school experience. I took a ton of divinity school. One of the benefits of the University of Chicago is a great divinity school, really rooted in justice. I was able to take a lot of courses that actually helped me lean into faith and work even closer with faith leaders, which I just got off a call with about an hour and a half ago. So understanding how we leverage the skills and talents and academic training that we have and that we learn in the academy, and then translate that into applied work is really, really important. I started my career right out of grad school doing health policy work, and did that until I joined Shedd. But previous to joining Shedd and growing up in Ann Arbor, which is where I'm from, I grew up with a whole bunch of amazing environmentalists who started in the 70s and 80s doing the work that that I have the lucky opportunity to try to grow from and build from, and then build the next generations, hopefully work to expand from. I think the other piece of career sort of transition I just want to note, the reason why I went all the way back to my childhood is that the people that I knew then, many of who started the Natural Resources Department at the University of Michigan, are now colleagues, are folks that I call up. It's their work that I reference One of them helped start the whole idea of environmental justice as a concept. And I get to work and to try to advance that every day today. It is an honor for me to try to continue to live the legacy of Professor Bryant. But it is not only my political science background, but also my conservation and my environmental background from long time ago that helps me do my work today. And the last thing I just want to say, just to try to give you a little illustration of how Jacqueline and I work together using plastic reduction as one of those focus. I've had the lucky opportunity that actually was earned, I guess. So it's less lucky and more hard work and a lot of sweat equity to be working with US senators and members of Congress to create, and now we're in our second version of it, the Break Free from Plastic Act, right? A great piece of massive legislation to try to reduce the impact of plastic pollution. Well, it's not only what happens in Congress that matters, it also matters how we have impacts in our local community. And the only way we were able to get to a 2.0 version of that bill that was released just last month is because of the work that Jacqueline's team does every day to highlight and elevate the issues, to bring it to the front of mind of consumers and neighbors and faith-based members and partners, and also to try to advance local businesses to move forward and to show ourselves as Shedd how we have made our practices and changed our work and can help bring along others to do the same. And the last piece I just want to sort of shine on is we work, and actually part of the reason why I was brought in is we're part of an aquarium conservation partnership, a whole bunch of aquariums from across the country who both try to advance our conservation practices and use that to move conservation policy, and then bring along some of our for-profit partners to try to follow those practices. All of that is fully integrated in the work that Jacqueline and I do every day. My work is less effective if Jacqueline's team isn't doing their work, and their work helps advance our work. It's a very collaborative and cross-functional kind of effort. So that's just a little bit of background about me. Happy to talk about anything from my background and more about how we work together.
Great. Thank you both so much for sharing. Jacqueline, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
No, I was just going to kick it over to you and just see how you'd like to go from here.
Great. Yeah. So thank you again. And now we're just going to open it up to everyone. If you have any questions for Andrea or Jacqueline, please, this is your time to ask questions. Get everything you need to know.
Hi, I have a question for both of you, actually. Thank you both so much for being here and speaking with our group today. We really appreciate you taking that time to make yourselves available to us members. My name's Tegan. I'm not going into conservation per se, but I'm a serial entrepreneur who focuses on sustainable waste management. And a big part of what I focus on is zero waste, zero landfill, zero plastics is really big for me. And I was wondering if either of you had advice for how you promote those environmental actions that ask people to change their behaviors. So, you know, both of my businesses have been in, you know, asking people to either recycle better or, you know, not create any waste at all. And one of the biggest issues I faced was communicating that message in a way that it was accessible and encouraging as opposed to, you know, frightening and finger pointing. So I was wondering if you had any advice for doing that successfully.
Yeah, maybe I'll take the first stab at that. That is such a good question. Oh, I mean, it's definitely a challenge, but I think that there are some lessons that I can share. And I also think that, as you might imagine, every case is going to be different. And every community that you're working with, every person you're working with is coming from a different place. And so I just kind of want to note that nuance. But for Shedd, you know, a lot of times we're speaking to a lot of people at once about sustainability issues. And so I can't help but to think about, we have a little bit of an equation of how to go about communicating about these things and try to urge people to action. The first thing is articulating the problem. Might seem kind of like no duh, but thinking about who you're speaking to and helping them understand what aspects of the problem are most relevant for them to understand. For us, we are connected to animals. And so we always situate an environmental issue as far as how it impacts animals, but also how it can impact human communities, and just help people understand the issue at hand. From there, we're going into, for Shedd, we a lot of times share what we've already done to try to address this issue. So we might share how we're conducting research, how we're already working to reduce our environmental footprint, or how we're trying to, kind of take our piece of the pie and move that along. I just think, as Andrea and I were speaking, it's helpful for folks to see a case study and to understand something, to kind of root it in, okay, I can see what somebody else has done. They may or may not be able to relate to that exact case study or think that that's something that they can do, but it still helps to kind of generate an understanding of what can be done and how we have already taken steps towards a solution. Because then by the point that you get to suggesting a behavior change or something that somebody else should do, I think it situates you in a place that is like, I've already done my piece, or I'm already working within my sphere of influence to make a change. What can you do to make a change? When I think when we're asking folks to make a behavior change, there are a couple of things to keep in mind. Again, what is the behavior that you're asking for something that makes sense for them and who they are, what their background is? Is it culturally, appropriate? Is it something that is within their power that they can do? And then last thing is, I think, connecting their action to the broader system. And this kind of goes back to articulating the problem as well, because the problem isn't just that person. The problem is something that is probably a systemic issue. And so I think it's helpful to understand how the problem can be part of a system, but the solution can be part of a system as well. So, I can do my piece, but what I'm also going to do, okay, I compost at home. I have a worm bin, and I do like pickup compost, like a residential pickup service. And I talk about it a lot with my friends. I'm not pressuring them. I'm not guilting them if they don't compost, but I just geek out and talk to them about composting all the time. That's my way of, not just me making the one behavior change myself, but I want to kind of ripple that out and spread that out to other folks. So I think it's important that, you put your own behavior change into a system to say, within Chicago, if we could compost more and reduce our food waste, we could collectively cut back on carbon emissions coming from landfills. We could have more, there are just, other things that we can kind of consider as far as the system at play. So those are a few things that come to mind for me.
Jacqueline, what Jacqueline was saying is so important. And I think that the systemic issue is really critical, right? That we don't make this, especially because these challenges, as Jacqueline was saying, are not here because individuals intentionally designed lots of plastic waste. We as individuals did not design plastic waste, right? However, what we can do to reduce that is real and impactful, right? And it's usually at multiple levels. One of the things I love doing is being able to like zoom out a little bit, right? To say, hey, here's the big thing that's going on. Here's the big picture. Here's the big problem. The big problem is there's way too much single-use plastic. And immediately, once saying that, give a couple stats, but immediately go to, and here are the ways we can change it. And you're not alone. You're a part of this amazing group of other individuals who are mobilized and acting and already having an impact and already creating change. And here's in my back pocket a couple examples of places that have done some incredible things, and it was just a handful of individuals. Being able to show examples that just a handful of individuals in places that you might not imagine. We often highlight some stuff that's been happening in Charleston, South Carolina, not the place that they think we're going to point to, right? They're thinking we're going to point to Berkeley or Boulder. And when we point to South Carolina as the place that we think is doing some of the best work, that really alters and opens their frame, right? It makes them think that they have more opportunity here. And Jacqueline hears me talk all the time about breadcrumbing. We want to help people move their way towards something, and you want to repeat that message and come back to it. I said earlier that I started my career doing public health work. One of the amazing opportunities I had was hanging out with the folks at the Truth Campaign. As some of you may or may not know, that's a byproduct of the master tobacco settlement. And they went out and did a lot of really amazing work to try to reduce tobacco use and move towards smoking cessation. And one of the things I also learned from them, and some of that was reading the documents coming from the industry, is how important it is. Sometimes we send things out on social media and we have this really big, everybody market and everybody audience. Other times we have a much more narrowed, and when you have that opportunity, zoom in and target. I'm a queer woman who's worked in the LGBT community for a long time. One of the lessons learned we had was being able to know who our audience was. On the tobacco side, we were doing some tobacco cessation work with the LGBTQ community, and we narrowed in, made something kitschy and funny and right on, right? And it met people where they were. We're trying to get them to stop something that's wicked hard to stop. Well, we recognized that it was wicked hard right at the front, right? We didn't try to sugarcoat it. We didn't try to BS anyone. We came with humor and joy, some real facts. And we also framed back out that, like, hey, this tobacco industry actually saw you as a potential profit maker. Don't let them do that. Don't let them play you like that, right? And so there are ways in which, when you have the opportunity to zoom in, know your audience, use language and real life examples that fit and work for them. And when you're wider, make sure that you don't forget the big systemic stuff, because I think often we focus, especially in this space, too much on the individual's behavior rather than the systemic issues, right? That are really important, and that we all can do things, right? But that's the other important thing. Let me just tell this really quick story on compost. I have a compost, and I compost, and my friends come over with their kids to my house for years. And I just heard that one of the little guys that's in my life, he was in class they were talking about sustainability. And he said, well, you know what I think we need to do is build a compost bin at our school. And, I know how to do it. So he's only in second grade. I know how to do it because my friend Andrea has one at her house. And I bet she could even tell us how to do it, right? So as adults, we actually really have this intergenerational impact on families and kids. And that's the other thing I just wanted to say is that, the change might not happen right away, but it doesn't mean that you're not having an impact.
Thank you. That's really insightful. And it's funny that you mentioned that, because we compost as well. And when we moved into our new place, we had neighbors who were here before us. And once they saw our compost bins, they started asking us about it. And now they're trying to start one as well. So it does catch on. And I love how you pointed out breadcrumbing and targeting people where they are. Because one thing I noticed with, especially a lot of the sustainability movements, sometimes they come from very good places, but sometimes they come from very pigeonholed places. And I didn't want to be blinded, and I didn't want to, especially working in Chicago, come up with solutions that were, not taking into consideration everyone. So thank you both very much for your insights. I appreciate it.
I have a question about, Jacqueline, you're working with restaurants, right, on single-use plastics. Is there, one, I'm sure that's very difficult. Is there any composting like laws or things that you're trying to implement with the restaurants as well that don't do it? And then on the policy side, is there any work on single-use plastics? And I know styrofoam has been a big one that's talked about in my environmentalist group, trying to get that banned in Chicago. So I was just wondering if, Jacqueline, you had any part in that along with the single-use plastic work.
Andrea is the person to speak to policy and legislation around plastic reduction or composting. But I'll just give a little bit of background of our work with restaurants just to kind of frame it out a bit. A few years ago in 2017, we launched a campaign called Shed the Straw. And it was, focused on plastic straw reduction in restaurants, asking restaurants to serve plastic straws just on request and to switch to a compostable option. And we had a lot of restaurants join that program, but the ask was really specific. Again, thinking of pigeonholing, or maybe that's not pigeonholing. It was just a very specific little ask. And quickly, we wanted to speak about other plastic, and it took us some time to develop the program that we just launched at the end of February. It's called Let's Shed Plastic. So it's more broad, and we're recognizing that we're in a pandemic right now. We made the barrier to entry very low. So it's very inclusive. We're asking restaurants throughout Chicago area to just make a commitment publicly to reduce their plastic use and to partner with Shedd to do that. We provide them some resources in a digital toolkit when they sign on, and we list them on our website, invite them to virtual events so they can learn more. And so composting is part of all of that. We have a few resources that we're giving. And again, as we're planning more virtual events, I really want to educate restaurants around Chicago more about composting, because I do not actually know how many restaurants compost. I don't think it's very many. I think I'm going to learn a lot as we talk to the restaurants about this. I don't know if you're familiar with the Andersonville neighborhood. They in particular are doing a lot around sustainability and working with businesses. So the Chamber of Commerce in Andersonville is taking a leadership role to get compost in all of the restaurants in their neighborhood. And they're also, I think they're going to be the first neighborhood in Chicago to have street side compost as well. So if you're in the restaurant, you can compost your waste there. If you take your compost to go or your food to go, you can compost out on street side, because it requires all of us, again, thinking of a system. The restaurant needs to do better, but then our waste management outside of that restaurant needs to help to support those solutions too, as if they're using things like compostable to-go-ware. So the Let's Shed Plastic program is just kind of getting on its feet. It's pretty new and we're kind of building it up, but we do have nearly 200 restaurants that have signed on already, including some large restaurant groups that are kind of, they have an influence with their purchasing and with their big brands and big audiences and things like that. So really excited to continue to bring education and change to the restaurants, and we're going to educate all the customers and people like us along the way too.
So on the policy side, one thing I just want to highlight, I was thinking this during the introduction, we really could use the leadership of universities to be able to move universities to taking commitments. So one of the things that have happened in some state universities across the country is for there being statewide commitments to move towards zero use with prohibitions against styrofoam or polystyrene, right? On request only accessories, but even more importantly, moving towards reuse in the cafeterias and in those on-site places, which is really similar to what we do in our buildings. Completely doable. And then having a plan on zero use within the university. That kind of work actually really helps us and some of the smaller businesses. So if, for example, there is a consortium of universities in Chicago, we have so many universities in Chicago. If there was a commitment by many of the major universities, or most of them, to move in that direction, that would reduce the cost for some of the purchasing challenges that many of our smaller businesses would have, because we'd be decreasing those costs. If they move to reuse and then move in a reuse way that is in a similar fashion, that would open up again opportunities for smaller businesses who on their own, the cost would be far too high, right, for them to move in that direction. So you can tell what I'm getting at here is, and this is a conversation I have all the time with governments, to have them move their procurement towards a direction, just like we did at Shedd and all of our aquariums that are part of our aquarium conservation, because we knew that we could move the marketplace. In order to help our smaller businesses, we need to continue to move the marketplace, and we need to put pressure on the city. So we are working on a bill to try to reduce and prohibit styrofoam, but also then move in a positive direction. But we're in a moment right now that's really challenging for some of the smaller businesses, especially the smaller BIPOC restaurants who may not have as many assets as the bigger ones, to be able to move in that direction. So how do we help use the levers that we have in the big places that can change the market and open up the opportunity to make it easier? Composting is the same way. If all of our big universities moved in that direction, it would reduce the cost and make the opportunity much greater. So while laws are one tool in our toolbox, all of these other pieces, you can tell, have to be happening in a consorted way and in a collaborative way towards that same goal in order for us to achieve those goals. And the last little tool in our toolbox is that purchasing that I mentioned earlier. That the money really has an impact to how these things work, and really encourage you to think about that tool in our toolbox as well.
I have a question just based on that. Actually, I have a lot of questions. So I'm Virginia. I'm the president of Net Impact. Hello. Thank you so much, of course, for joining us today. And we're so thrilled that Michaela could con you into our little event here. But I have a lot of questions because I'm very interested in like composting and waste reduction. And so I wanted to kind of ask about like citywide composting. So it sounds like, Andersonville is starting that, but I'm just wondering if there is or can be a framework to start getting like the city of Chicago overall to start doing it. And I mean, they already are pretty abysmal at recycling. Hopefully with the new contract with Lakeshore, there will be improvements. I make a cautious hope, but I'm also just wondering like if you have thoughts on citywide composting.
Andrea, what do you know about citywide composting?
Yeah, I think that we've been in this terrible place where there's been a circular, slow death conversation about recycling, and it's pulled us away, I think, from a really important conversation about composting and reuse. To be honest, I feel like we've put so much energy into the recycling circle, and then really a not very productive conversation. Although I'm so glad for my lawyer friends, by the way, that they did all the work that they did, and all of our journalist friends who like highlighted contracts that were clearly not well designed and maybe even perhaps corrupt, right? And so great to be leaning towards a really, really great contract with a great contractor, which we at Shedd use, and it has allowed us a long time ago to move towards compost. So the reason why I said corrupt, by the way, I just don't want to say that and then not explain. There was what it was illuminated by the lawyers and the journalists is that one of the former recipients of the contract was receiving funds for picking up our regular everyday trash, but also the recycling, but they would say that the recycling was contaminated and then add it to the trash and they'd get paid twice. And that's the part that was seen as potentially not fair play, and maybe not the best use of public dollars. So we need to move ourselves towards that. There's been really good conversations at the state level. I think we are moving in the right direction, but I do hope we all spend way more time talking about compost and reuse and a little less on a broken recycling system.
I will also say, I don't know if you know a gentleman by the name of Rich Cohen, but he founded 20 years ago a compostable packaging company that's based in Chicago. And I worked for him. I interned with him over last summer, booking speaking engagements for him because he's basically trying to transform composting systems because he says, I made a compostable packaging and it's not getting composted. So if you're at all interested in that, get in touch and I can share that information because he might be someone interesting for you guys to talk to if you're working with composting, because that's his bread and butter for the last 2 decades. And he's also someone who's like, forget recycling, it's never going to happen. Composting is where it's at. And I think one of the biggest problems for that is just getting industrial composting, because then, those things like the plant-based like spoons or whatever, they need the like industrial composting process.
Yeah, and there is an element of recycling that's important. And the other thing I just want to highlight, and I didn't say anything about this, but I'm a huge fan. I'm from the state of Michigan, and I talk way too much about that, but because I'm proud of it. But we in our state have a 10-cent deposit law, have since I was a little one, and it's incredibly effective. So for things like bottles and cans that are in a deposit system, that really is recycling them, and it works. But plastic is different because it degrades in such a different way. So I just wanted to make that point that it's not that all recycling is bad, but plastic in particular, as a substance has some problems, both from production, which is the other thing that Jacqueline and I have been talking more about, that the actual production of it, right? It uses petroleum, it pollutes heavily, both by people that work to people that work in and live near that community. So if we can move towards things that are more reusable and much more energy efficient with recycling, then all the best.
So are there any other questions from any of our fine attendees? This is your opportunity to ask these experts your questions. Otherwise, I have many.
I have one more, and it actually, it's open to both of you, but Andrea, in your introduction, you talked about, having to work across kind of different divides and reach out to not only different departments and organizations, but external factors too. And I was wondering, and you talked about some wonderful toolkits, but if you had any specific advice or things that you did to get the right individual, to find the right individual and to say the right thing to that individual, to get them on either on your side or at least interested in working with you. Or did you just happen to find, partnership because people were interested in what you were doing?
Partnership is something you have to work towards and stay open to, right? Jacqueline and I last week were working on a project that we're requesting federal funds for. It only came about because both of us kept our minds open and creative. So creativity is also a really underappreciated element, as is paying attention to what relationships you have with folks and listening and hearing what's their priorities, and then trying to figure out much of what I do. And now that Jacqueline's worked with me, not lived with me, but some days are so long that, that she now knows more about how I do my job, which seems like it's just trying to pass a bill, right? But really it's about figuring out what that goal is, figuring out who all the players are and what tools we have in our toolbox, and then using them to try to move our way towards that. You don't do in one jump. You almost never in my career, actually, I'll say this, I can say it completely, as in one jump, we've been able to achieve whatever the goal was, right? You're always moving in a stepwise approach, and sometimes you come back down and you actually go backwards, and then you have to keep working back towards it. But paying attention to who's doing what matters to them, and how we can move our way towards that place. It means that you're going to have to be super, super creative and really open, and open to failure. And that's the other thing I just really that it's really important to know is if you try something and it doesn't work, do not stop and do not get too beat up about it. I am trying every single day, multiple times a day, to see if I can get something to get some traction. Some pieces of the things that I pitch do and some don't, right? And they're all situational why those things may or may not work. I'll keep them in my back pocket. Sometimes I come back to people a whole year or years later, right? But you just keep thinking that way. I think it's much more important to be open to hear what people's interests are, think about what their skills and assets are, and then stay in touch with them also. We all move from point A to point B. I just brought on some colleagues that I've known for also 25 years that are now working with me again. We now have shorthand for each other. We may be working on a different subject, but we know each other and we know how each other's works and we trust each other. And I don't think it matters if I'm working in government affairs or Jacqueline's working in action. These are really similar sets of skills and tools. And perhaps even more so for some days when Jacqueline's out in the field with her team trying to do work, they're going to hit barriers every single freaking day, right? They're going to be out in the field, something will go sideways, and they're going to have to be creative in order to keep it moving forward.
I want to add a couple of thoughts to that, Andrea, just you sparked a couple reflections that I also think relationships and partnerships are so critical for a lot of things, but I think something that helps us do our work is also, being really open-minded. Andrea mentioned, being creative. I think it's easy with sustainability work or conservation work, which in my mind, they kind of, they blur a bit, but it can be easy to see a problem and be like, I want to fix that, and try to take a straight line to get to that solution. But a lot of what we've talked about today are, just the things that there are broader systems at play. There are a lot of influences at play. And so I think I'm especially just over the last year, I've been kind of geeking out about this public dialogue around intersectional environmentalism, which is just really inspiring to me. It's looking outside of just the environmental goals that we that are in front of us, and understanding the whole person, and understanding how we can work for a better planet for people and for wildlife and for all of us all together. And so I think that it's important to look outside of just your straight line, the goal ahead of you, to understand if you're working with a partner or a community and you have barriers to get them to change that behavior or to do that thing that is going to be more sustainable. I think that there are just a lot of ways to look outside of the box and just try to be creative with what are the other things that are, impacting their community, that are impacting their business. How can you use your relationship building? I'm kind of, just reiterating, I think a lot of what Andrea was saying. When you get to actually know somebody, all of the different influences and challenges that they may be facing. And so you can't rush and take a straight line always to run to that finish line. It takes time, and it can take just some creative thinking.
Thank you very much.
I had a quick question. I'm only a sophomore in college, so this is kind of, I don't know. I just want to know more about what you guys do in a day at your work. I know it's kind of a simple question, but I just kind of want the layout. Like, what's a random, like a Tuesday at work?
I'll take that one first. It's been interesting over the past year. We have been working remotely for the most part, but there are a lot of folks who've still been working at the aquarium. Since Andrea and I, a lot of our work is in partnership and outside of the aquarium. We've mostly been working off-site. My day-to-day, I work a lot with internal partners and then with external partners. And my team is both responsible for some of the broad kind of coordination of partnerships and movements, but we also do host a number of programs and events. And so a lot of our day-to-day is coordinating a lot of what Michaela did to get us here today, to coordinate speakers, to provide educational opportunities for folks, and to run events. My team does a number of volunteer events around habitat restoration and beach cleanups. Just yesterday, they hosted a few beach cleanups on Montrose Beach to get it ready for the piping plovers. I don't know if you're familiar with Monty and Rose. There are a couple cute little piping plovers that have been nesting at Montrose Beach over the last couple of years, and it's an endangered species, so of special concern. Look them up if you're not familiar with this, because they're really cute little birds. But so we use all of these opportunities to educate folks and bring them out to act with us, and so that we can also have a lot of dialogue and learn from people and hear where they are and what are their concerns around the environment and sustainability. And so anyway, that's kind of going a little bit bigger into what those events are, but it's coordinating events, coordinating speakers, and working with internal and external collaborators. I think a good chunk of our time is just having conversations with folks to see, what are their priorities? How can we continue to align to make sure that we're heading in the same direction together? Andrea and I also, and this will kind of be my way of transitioning to her, but we work a lot on our strategy to make sure that we're not just keeping people busy, but we're keeping people, encouraging them to take the action that is working towards a long-term sustainable solution for the environmental issues that we're trying to make a difference on. So the strategy is something that I really love when Andrea and I are able to put our heads together and make sure that we're being smart with what we're doing.
Yeah, I'll try to take you literally and walk you through a little bit of what happened today. I'm really lucky to be able to work in a whole bunch of different spheres. So I work here in Illinois, in Chicago, in the metropolitan area, as well as in the entire state in the Great Lakes. That's on mostly freshwater work, and then get the opportunity to work nationally and internationally on marine policy. So today, I had the opportunity to follow up on some legislation and the fundraising that we are, the effort to get what used to be called an earmark, but we're calling a community project, which we're doing, which is a project hopefully with the Chicago Park District to try to help clean up post-industrial, really icky space and make it beautiful, both for wildlife and humans, in a part of the city that normally doesn't give a lot of love. So you can tell that we're really trying to focus on environmental justice and equity issues. And so that was one of the reasons why we prioritized that. So I'm continuing to lift and try to move that thing forward. It was a really great project. We're also, just as a sidebar to give you a sense of the other diversity of my work, I'm also trying to secure COVID funding for our Shedd. So I'm also working a little bit on some funding around that. So doing some follow-up with members of Congress. I emailed a couple members of Congress's staff who I was asking to help with some challenges we're having with the Small Business Administration, and they asked me some follow-up. Also got a great email from our colleague in Congresswoman Underwood's office. I'm quoted in a press release they just released today on a Farmers on the Front Lines of Climate Crisis Act. So I'll send you, by the way, Jacqueline, it just got released at 3 o'clock, the press release. So this is something that we're doing to try to, this is a project I'm doing federally to try to help reduce the impacts of climate change and really encourage sustainable practices, regenerative practices for farmers. Got to hang out with our chief animal officer and our vice president for research on some Bahamian issues. So I got to work on some things on the Bahamas. Got to sit in on a meeting with a bunch of statewide partners on a statewide water planning bill. And we're trying to brainstorm how to move some long-standing state employees to be more creative about how they understand this state plan that they've been doing for years after years, and not used to having external partners sitting at the table with them, especially faith-based leaders and folks in communities of color. So we're trying to help them open their mind to new ways of thinking about these things. So that I'll stop listing, but that gives you a really good idea of how diverse it is. And the day goes all over the place, and I need to be able to keep things moving towards these big goals, but achieving it through these small actions and these small bits. I also saw in the piece on the chat a question about what kind of skills and what gets you prepped for your job. And I was making the point of talking about my experience at University of Chicago in grad school and taking some divinity school courses. Interdisciplinary work is really, really important, but also how to use your tools that you've learned. So I'm a political scientist by training. The guy I studied with, amazing man I studied with, Professor Michael Dawson at University of Chicago, went to Michigan, and a bunch of my colleagues went to Michigan for grad school. They're a big quant school. They're big quantitative. I know how to do big, really boring longitudinal data analysis. Well, how that comes in handy every day, I'll go all the way back to living in Boston and doing some of my first environmental justice work. I was working with some women at MIT who were doing this was in the 90s, so imagine the technology. They were geocoding and cross-hatching pollution, high concentrations of pollution, and cancer. So cancer alley ideas, right? They were geocoding this stuff way back in the day. And we were able to make arguments with members of Congress and with the administration at the time, which was Clinton, that we needed to move funds and do EPA super fund cleanups, but we also needed to make sure there was HHS money in those sites to help the people living there. And we just needed to illuminate the intersection. We are especially focused on cancers impacting women because reproductive cancers have there are some types of pollution that have cross-sectional impacts, sectional impacts on the pollution and the cancers have a relationship. But we only able to do that by doing big data. And I was brought in because I could run some of those numbers and right. So my skills and assets in being able to do longitudinal data, understanding survey research, I've used over and over again in my, I don't do it every day. I don't run those numbers anymore, but I know how to read them. I know how to interpret them, and it helps me when I'm working to try to move things forward. So whatever your skills and assets are, leaning in towards them and trying to, while you are in college, to take classes in a really diverse way so that you understand how to listen and hear and interpret back to others other things. And I don't know, Jacqueline, if you wanted to move on with that.
Yeah, it's making me just think a lot about what skills I think are helpful in my day-to-day. For undergrad, I went to University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and studied biology and chemistry, and just loved geeking out about science, but didn't really know what to do with, my degree from there. The options were lab research or field research or continue grad school. I didn't really want to go deeper into science at that time. So I took a little bit of time off and worked a couple jobs. I was working, I interned at the Museum of Science and Industry and started working at this educational facility that school groups would come take field trips there to learn about different careers within science and careers within this other career training program. But so I started, doing science education and was really excited about it. And so I went back to to DePaul to get my master's in education. So I actually don't have a degree in sustainability, but I think that my combination of knowing enough about science as an undergrad with biology degree, and then getting my master's in education, I think my ability to break down and communicate and teach about science and tough topics has really helped me. It helps me to learn about the issues that I'm trying to tackle, and it helps me to communicate with folks. I feel like Andrea and I might be kind of similar, where we're sort of generalists. I can do a talk about plastic pollution, but I do not know all of the science about every compostable material or about plastic. I can learn enough to be able to understand the issue and to speak to it. Same with climate change or sustainable seafood or invasive species. We have to learn just enough about these issues so that we can work with different folks to help address them and then kind of move our audiences or partners along. And so I think my ability to just kind of understand an issue with that science background and then be able to communicate and educate other folks. The education, and we've talked a lot about behavior change, which I think kind of tips into a mini field of conservation psychology, understanding what gets people to kind of change their behavior is something that I think is related to education. It's not like those are the same things, but you have to take child psychology and you have to understand how people learn things to get your master's in education. So I think I'm putting that to work in kind of a unique way. Before I started at Shedd, I worked at Lincoln Park Zoo and just ran education programs and had a blast with it, summer camps and adult lectures and family overnights and things like that. But what I love about what I'm doing at Shedd is that it's applying towards solutions. It's not necessarily just education for the sake of learning more about the biology of gorillas versus chimpanzees, which is super fun and really interesting. But I love at Shedd that we're able to, take what we understand about the natural world and channel it into solutions. So that's kind of how I've gotten to where I'm at. I think that just one other, I don't know that this is a skill or maybe just a characteristic, but I think that optimism and positivity is something that's so critical to all of our worlds here on this call, that we have to believe that we can work towards solutions. And then I think that the biggest challenge then is when things look like they are not moving or changing. But I think that we talked a little bit today about recognizing the bit by bit, the chipping away towards a solution. I try to, be sure to celebrate the small things that we succeed with, because especially when we're trying to make huge changes, it's really important to celebrate all of the little wins that we get along the way. So I think that's kind of what comes to mind as far as different skills and different challenges of the day-to-day. So thanks for asking that question. I know we have about 5 minutes. Maybe we can take another question or two.
There was a great question in the chat, and I think this kind of plays off of what you both just discussed. I apologize, Solani or Saloni, if I just said that wrong. I apologize. Please email me or hit me up somehow and be like, girl, get it together. She asked, not only what skills do you think are most important for someone interested in a job like yours, but what are some of those biggest challenges that you face day to day? And I think we've touched on some of them, but I wonder, I guess that could even be asked, what's your least favorite part about the work that you do? What's the challenge?
Yeah, it's full of challenges, right? And I think I'm going to lean into this to talk about knowing what your assets and skills are and leaning in towards those, and then being able to identify folks that can help you with things that maybe aren't your best assets, right? So one thing, work is hard, no matter what the work is, even if you really love it, right? And not all of us are equally skilled at every single element, and nor should we all do everything, right? So Jacqueline and I just did this project that I'm just leaning in on it because we just finished it. We both have different assets and skills. I knew how to open up the opportunities for us on the Hill. I knew how to pursue that and build a couple of partnerships. She had similar partnerships, but with some different cohorts, and she has a more on the ground, longer term plan about how she wants this program to work with her and her boss, right? So we worked in tandem with her and her teammates to try to build this out. I couldn't do all of it alone, and it wouldn't have been as smart and as impactful as it was if I would have just done this on my own, right? And similarly, if Jacqueline would have, right? We need to, us learning and understanding how each of us have different skills and assets is about leaning in towards that. There are going to be days when things are awful, where things go sideways and things don't go our ways. And I think I just want to reiterate what Jacqueline just said about celebrating the victories. Don't just do it for your team, do it for yourself. Put a little bit aside. Like when something happens that's great, send it to your own home address and say, hey, someone taught me how to do this years ago, like for a rainy day. Here's something good that happened. Here's something where your teammates said you did a good job, or you got to add a girl. Or way to go, right? And remind yourself that happened, because it can be so easy when things go sideways to think that the world is ending and nothing good is happening. And it's really important to be able to bring that sunshine, to reflect it in your friends, colleagues, and teammates, but also to know it in yourself, right? So I really urge you to do that and to think about that. I also think it's important, and I'll say this, I've had a wonderful career, and I've had a bunch of different opportunities, including a couple opportunities to run NGOs and as the person who comes in to sort of clean things up, get it, set back up again, and then pass it on to someone else who's going to run it for a long term. In doing that, I've learned a lot of humility, right? Like not everything's going to go brilliantly. And you need to know how to build a smart team that you can trust and lean into for them to do the work. I only can do that as much. I only can let go as much as I do these days, because I learned how to do that, right? It didn't just come intuitively. We all like succeeding and running things and doing things ourselves, especially those of us who are driven. But it's really important to have smart teams and to lean into them and to acknowledge when you've messed up. Because if you acknowledge when you've messed up, your team members will also feel more free to do that, and you'll be able to learn from it. And when you create an environment where you say, there's going to be failure, and the point is about identifying and learning from that. And it isn't a failure. It just means it didn't work right that minute. What happened? Let's go see what happened, and then let's try to learn from it, right? That's just going to be something that's going to happen. That's my 2 cents on that. And it's not exactly what you asked, but I hope that's helpful.
I think that really summed it up. Yeah, thank you so much, Saloni, for that question and for those answers. I mean, Yeah, there's no way of getting around. It's going to be hard a lot of the time, but I love that you pointed out stocking away like a little squirrel. It's like squirreling away your little love nuts for later. That was, I wish we weren't recording right now.
And now you know my Tegan is one of my favorite people. No, I think that was really beautiful, Andrea, because I have encountered so many people as I've started to work in environmental sustainability, like so many really dire, negative, like really hopeless people who are like, we're gonna be in an apocalypse in a decade and nothing matters and who cares, and we're all just going to die very quickly. And you're like, okay, well, fun. That sounds like a cool party for all of us. So I appreciate your optimism, and that's how you get through continuing to work on it. Because if you're hopeless, then how do you continue to work on it? And I have a 7-year-old, 5-year-old, and 18-month-old set of nieces, you know, so like I can't give up on them. I'm not willing to. So I really appreciate your words. Thank you.
One last thing on that, you know, and I'll just be real, and Jacqueline knows this about me, right? I worked on HIV and AIDS. And women's cancers issues. So I've seen a thing or two. I'm an out queer person who's also seen a thing or two and had a thing or two said about me and my family. And that also does something, right? Like, what matters is good people doing good stuff. And I also have seen in my short lifetime, I know it feels probably long to you all, but I'm in my 50s, so I'm outing myself my age as well. But in my lifetime, I've seen massive change that I would have never, when I was your age, would have never imagined would happen. And it happened, right? It doesn't mean it's staying, right? I mean, as we can see what's happening around transgender athletes and transgender kids, right? So you could tell one story a year ago that would have talked about things moving in one direction, but now we're having another experience, right? I say this about the marginal status that I have and the life experience I went through, because it provides some resilience. And it's important to like remember that when we're talking about dire things like climate change, right? Like this awful plastic crisis we're in the midst of. It is awful, it is dire. Both of those things are true, and we can have an impact. We have power. Like the most, you know, I truly believe in Patti Smith's song about the people have the power. That is the most basic thing that I believe in. And as long as we believe and know that we have power, it may not look like what other people who have power look like. That doesn't mean we don't have it. And so remembering that is also something really, really important. And knowing that we can go through heck and high water like we just did over this past year and survive. And hopefully we learn things from that and we try to be ever better, amazing, loving human beings to each other and to the people we love and to our neighbors. And if we do that, then we're going to have an even more impactful work, I think.
Thank you both so much. This has just been absolutely incredible. I couldn't be happier, and I know my team and our attendees are as well. I just had one quick question before we say goodbye. I was wondering, is there any way that we can get involved? I'm sure there is a lot of upcoming events and stuff. Hopefully now that things are opening up, we can do more in person. But if it's easier to email me too, and I can send it to our members, that's fine too. But if you guys had anything off the top of your heads right now.
Yeah, I feel like a couple ideas came up as we've been chatting, thinking about how DePaul can get more involved. I know there's talk about, DePaul's sustainability efforts. And so, looking for ways to activate your DePaul community. If anybody is interested in ever getting out in the field to do a beach cleanup or to restore habitat, it's a great way to connect with other people who want to make a difference, and you can learn more about nature in the Chicago area and understand, why are we protecting it? What is even living here? Our website for that is sheddaquarium.org/action days. And if you're interested in learning more about the work that we're doing around plastic specifically, because we are putting a lot of work into the policy and different partnerships with restaurants and communities. The website for that is sheddaquarium.org/plastic. Andrea, I know we have the petition for Break Free from Plastics. We might be able to share that with these folks if they're interested in reaching out to Congress people.
Absolutely. You can do that through that. We can share that link. Also, you know, it sounded like folks are interested in trying to move legislation in the city level. You know, the easy way to do that is just pick up the phone and call your alderman or woman and just let them know that you think that now is the time for us to act on reducing our plastic pollution in the city, and we need to move on it. And that we need to have composting in the city of Chicago. Just pick up the phone and do that, or send an email to them. That's a great idea. I also really do want to lean into what Jacqueline just said about DePaul. You all could really make a difference if DePaul made a statement and if there was a position that DePaul made, and if there were action DePaul was taking to remove and to reduce plastic pollution. If there's anything we could do to help you do that, love to get some PR around that too, because the more you act, the more space there is for the rest of us too as well.
That would be